Hello, and thank you for joining me, Robin Marchand, today in this Transform how-to video exploring Transform session data load functionality. Transform users have the option to load large databases, but limit the data loaded into their session based upon different selections. Think about it. What if you can have one large database for all of your acreage containing all the needed data for your whole team? Business development, each asset team, even the development team, everyone working in one database, but pulling in smaller bits of data to their session that pertain to their specific charge. I think I might have heard the folks responsible for loading and keeping data up to date cheer just a little bit in the background. Before we dive into the session data load, here are some things to note. Upon opening a new Transform session, the session is going to be empty of data for the linked repository. Users will be prompted to select data to load into their session. Users also have options to load data later, as they can open this utility when desired. Lastly, the data tree will let users know the data counts in the project versus the data counts in their session. First, upon opening a new session, the session will be empty of data from the linked database. Users will be prompted to select data to load into the session. If a user selects no here, they will have very limited data in the session. Take a look at the data tree to see some of those. But access to the Transform user interface to load new data as needed will be available. If you happen to click yes, the same session data load dialog will open to allow users to select data to load into a session. Note, if this is an empty database, the dialog will not be able to load data into the session. Users will need to load data into their Transform database. Within the Add Data to Session dialog, users can select the data to load, and each tab allows different data selection. I suggest to work left or right through the dialog, clicking each tab to select data to load to the session. This dialog is designed to make all desired selections before clicking Apply at the bottom. The primary data of each tab can be selected in the upper panel. Click the checkbox to load that data into the session. Click the green plus or minus to select or deselect all in that specific panel. The lower panel allows users to select secondary data to pull into the session. As data is selected to pull into the session, notice the project and selected counts will adjust, as well as the memory meter. Memory cache can be optimized in run config settings. Let's start with this new session here and work through the session data log dialog a bit more. This new session is connected to a database with data, but I haven't pulled any data into the session. Remember, we're going to work through all of the tabs in the session data load and then select all the data to load into the session before clicking Apply at the bottom. First, on the Wells tab, users can select well list, wellbore list, or individual wells to load into the session. The top panel is the primary data, in this case wells, and the bottom panel is the secondary data loaded into the well or wellbore. Toggle at the top for well list, wellbore list, and wells to pull into your session. Click the green plus or minus to select or deselect all in the upper panel. If you would like to pull in only certain wells contained in a well list, click only that well list to pull into the session. Data will only be pulled into the session if the checkbox is engaged. Once the wells and wellbores are selected, the lower panel allows users to select secondary data within the wells to pull into the session. Notice the project selection count and session count as you're doing these selections. By default, the secondary data in the lower panel will be checked on typically, and as data is selected to pull into the session, notice the project and selected counts will adjust, as well as the memory meter. Moving to the next tab, Horizon Surfaces. Here, users can select Horizon Surfaces to load to a session from their database. The top panel is the geological feature, and the secondary panel shows data that geological features are associated, like aerial fault polygons, faults, and structural models to load into the session. Thinking about the parent geological feature and a child property map associated with that feature, pulling the geological feature into a session will pull in all associated property maps. The Horizon Surfaces will filter automatically to selected interpreters, but we can review selected interpreter data to bring into that session in the Interpreter tab later. Click the checkbox to include data in the session. The green plus checks all the boxes in that panel, while the green minus unchecks the boxes in that panel. Use the filter box in the upper right to filter search data in that panel. Note the memory tile cache doesn't apply to Horizons and Seismic, and generally the current user interpreter is selected by default. The next tab is Seismic. Here users can select Seismic both 3D volumes and 2D lines to load to a session from their database. Toggle at the top for 3D versus 2D selection. In addition, the bottom panel allows for the selection of velocity models and synthetics to load into the session that are associated with selected seismic data in the primary top panel. The seismic data will filter to selected interpreters automatically, but users can select interpreters on the Interpreter tab. Click the checkboxes to include data into the session. Remember, it's best to select all data to load into the session on each tab before clicking Apply, so let's move on to the next tab, Other Data. Here, users can select culture data, grids, MV-stats equations, microseismic, polygons, property maps not associated with a geological feature, regions, and transects to load to a session from their database. These data will be selected on to load in the session by default and filtered to selected interpreters automatically. Users can select interpreters on the Interpreter tab. Click the checkbox to include data in the session. Let's move along to the Interpreters tab. Here, users can select interpreters to filter the associated data to load into the session from their database. Other selected data in the other tabs will filter to selected interpreters automatically. Click the checkbox to include an interpreter's data in the session. Note, if there's no interpreter for the data, it's treated in Transform as required data and not able to be filtered out or unselected. Once all desired selections are made in the dialog, click Apply. Check the data tree to see the data loaded into your session. Users can return to the Session Data Load dialog to load more data into the session as needed. Notice the data tree counts show the session versus project data. Don't forget to save your session. Worried you'll miss data others load? Don't worry. Keep an eye out on this area. You'll be prompted project data has to be updated. You can save your session and open the Session Data dialog again. I love to guide clients to have multiple sessions for different business goals so they can take advantage of the smaller data set needed to complete the task without being bogged down by their colleagues' data. Save multiple sessions per database. Some things to remember when you open the Session Data Load dialog again. Users must save their session prior to opening this dialog again to adjust the data after being pulled into the session. Opening this dialog again will reselect whatever you have loaded or created in your session. Unchecking items that are loaded to the session will unload them from the session. Go ahead and give this a try in your Transform project. Thanks for spending some time with us today. Got questions? Want to learn more? Email me at robin.marchand@enverus.com or click here for more information about Enverus Transform.